it's a different experience, and it's a good experience. It's good to just be with you, because if you can't stand being with yourself, you need to figure out why that is and work on that.
Welcome to the Crossing It Off podcast, where each episode we share the stories of individuals that are living out their bucket/life goal lists. I am your host, Roger Williams, and through hearing our guests' adventures, my goal is that you will find encouragement and empowerment to add and cross items off of your list. Welcome, everybody, to the show. I am super excited today for our guest. He is a marathon runner, a world traveler, a toe shoe enthusiast, and a great photographer. Keith Weathermon, thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely, Roger. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tell the audience and the listeners, what did you cross off your list?
I'm riding my bicycle down the Baja of Mexico. So riding my bicycle from Mexicali down to Cabo San Lucas.
How many miles was that in total?
You know, I had ventured off a little bit and visited some other little cities and towns. And so it ended up being 31 days and about 1,100 to 1,200 miles.
1,200 miles. So you weren't just day in and day out. You stopped and hung out and took in some culture and some sights and things as well. You didn't just strictly bike straight through.
Yeah, absolutely. I spent a couple of days in some different campgrounds. I did some wild camping, a couple of days in hotels to take a shower and get cleaned up. But for the most part, it was wild camping and staying in campgrounds. But really, just every day I was doing something, either riding my bicycle or hiking and just meeting people and doing some different adventures.
That sounds so much fun. Let's go back a little bit. And why was this particular item on your list? Why was this important for you to do?
You know, I have a friend named Valerie, and I was talking to her one New Year's Eve, and she said, I asked her what's on her New Year's resolutions, and she goes, Keith, I don't do New Year's resolutions. I do bucket list, things that I want to go do and see during the year. And I really like that. And, I'm a firm believer. And if you want to change something in your life, you don't wait for a new year to do that. You do that immediately and you start working on that. So, but I really like the bucket list or making things, putting things on your list at the beginning of the year that you want to do and accomplish for the year. And that was always on my list. And then I got back from hiking the Camino, walking across Spain and down Portugal, and came back to the States. My dad had passed away, so I stopped my trip early, came home for the funeral, and then I was in Walla Walla for Christmas, and it was cold. I was shoveling snow, and I was sitting there on Christmas Day going, gosh, what can I do? I need to go find something warm to do. I love Mexico. I lived in Puerto Vallarta for a couple of years, but I wanted to do something that challenges me both physically and mentally. That's where I really feel alive and present. And I was going through my list that I had made the prior year, and bicycling down the Baja was on it, and kayaking in the Sea of Cortez was on that list too. So I was like, we got to go do that. Let's make it happen. So on Christmas Day, I think I told my family when we were sitting there eating dinner that I'm going to go leave and bicycle down Baja, and it's completely cut them off guard.
So let's talk about some of the preparation. And did you have to rent a bike? Did you send your bike down there?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was snowing in Walla Walla. There was a lot of snow this year, and I have a Sprinter van. I bought it when COVID hit. I was going to hike the Pacific Crest Trail, and I had sold my house in Coeur d'Alene, and I was basically homeless other than my van. So I had a van and put my bicycle in the van, went to spent a little bit of time driving down the Oregon, California coast. Really had a good time taking pictures and enjoying that trip. And then I got to San Diego. My friend Kelson lives in San Diego, so he loaded up, gave me a ride to Mexicali and started pedaling. So I have a bike and all the gear. So there wasn't a whole lot of planning or it was on my list. And the people that know me laugh is like, I get something in my head and I don't necessarily communicate it well or share it very often, or plan very often. I just go and do.
So I love that philosophy. I think it can be sometimes a very smart one, scary one for sure, but a smart one, because you actually wind up doing things sometimes when you have that mindset. So did you like have your stuff? I mean, you said you wild camped. That means you had to have a tent. You did say you stayed in hotels. How much? Maybe the easiest question is, how much did your gear weigh, and how did you just have a device on the bike where you stored it while you rode, or how'd that work?
Yeah, I have panniers on my bike. It's a Trek 1120, so it's geared up for bike packing.
Okay.
It has wider tires, so a lot of the roads that I was on and the trails that I'm on were dirt and gravel. It was good for that. When you hit the pavement, it was a little bit harder pedaling because of the road resistance, or the resistance because of the bigger tires. But it made life a lot easier when you're pedaling down the dirt roads and riding the Baja, pedaling down the Baja. The best adventures were the ones when you got off the pavement and you got on the dirt roads, and that's where you met the great people, the Mexican people, and the pavement with all the cars and everything were a little bit scary, but that was the fun part, is being on the
off-road. What's like the percentage of those two things, would you say?
It all really depends on the route that you go. There's the Baja Divide, which is basically 95% dirt. The route that I did was probably 50% dirt and 50% pavement.
And so you say there's multiple routes. Did you use any kind of app or something on your phone to like navigate? How did you have like a physical map? Like, how did you know where you were going? I mean, we walked the Camino together, so I know that this just kind of follow the arrows, and it's easy.
Right.
But this seems
out
like
out there were no arrows.
Yeah.
And when I hiked the Camino, and as you probably know, that I spent most of my time hiking the wrong way, even when there were arrows. That's part of the adventure, and that's what really makes it fun. But I have an app called Maps.me, and so I kind of have an idea of where I want to go. And when you bicycle or even drive down the Baja, you spend time crossing over the Sierra Madre Mountains, maybe 3 or 4 times. So you see the Pacific Ocean, and you see the Sea of Cortez, which is awesome, but you're going up and over the mountain range each time you go and see each side. So it takes a little bit of effort and elevation gain to do that. But Maps.me is what I used, and every once in a while I would run into people and I would talk to them, and they say, hey, you need to go visit this little village and take a side tour. And, one of the stories that I have is meeting Tom, and we went to Guerrero Negro, which is a town that makes salt, sea salt for your food and everything. And he goes, we got to go see the whales. We got to hop on a little tango boat and go out in the middle of the bay and see the whales. And that was one of the best adventures I ever had. And if I hadn't taken a side trip to go do that, I would have never done that. So it was a great experience. So I think probably the key that I take away from this trip is don't have a set plan or set agenda of what you're going to do and what you're going to see. Have an idea of the direction you want to go, and then take it from there.
Yeah, that's a great way to do things. I wish I had done that on my Camino. I was a little bit rigid, too rigid, I think, for my own good. But I think that's a great way to do it. You talked about your adventure with Tom. Is there anything that you experienced that was like uncomfortable or you didn't expect, or that was like, oh, I wish I would have known this before I started?
When I started, I knew I was going to be doing a bunch of wild camping. You
Mm-hmm.
know, when you start pedaling and you're out in the middle of nowhere, and you could be out in the middle of nowhere for 2 or 3 days without seeing people, without seeing, a car, a house. You plan your water accordingly because you're out in the middle of the desert.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to make sure that you carry plenty of food, plenty of water. I understood that, but you can understand something, but until you live it, it's a
Right.
different thing. There was times where I was sitting out in the middle of nowhere going, geez, I could die out here. Nobody would
Oh,
have the faintest idea where I'm at. Nobody would ever find me.
wow.
So yeah, so it's being aware of your surroundings, and I never felt unsafe in the Baja. You sit around and you watch TV and read articles, and I'm comfortable with Mexico. I love the Mexican people. I think they're the most friendly, loving people I've ever met in my life. But just being out in the middle of nowhere where you don't have any cell phone coverage, you don't have anything, you have to be resilient. Just be aware of your surroundings and know that there's consequences if you screw up.
When we walked the Camino, even like you and I would, hang out at night and bunk together, and then in the morning, your pace was a lot greater than mine, so you would take off, and you'd be way ahead. I'd be halfway through my day, and you'd already be at the next town. So, so, but along the way, I know that you ran into people, you talk to people, you hang out, you have lunch with people. How did this differ from the Camino as far as being with people or not being with people?
Yeah, that's a good question. There were two people. Wherever I go and eat lunch or go into town, I always meet new people. I love talking to people.
Hmm.
But there's times where you're out in the middle of nowhere and there's nobody to talk to. So you're there with your thoughts. And I really enjoyed that on this trip, which was a little bit different than the Camino, where, there was spots where there were 3 days where I didn't talk to anybody or see anybody. So that's a lot of time with just you. And,
Hmm.
and it's a different experience, and it's a good experience. It's good to just be with you, because if you can't stand being with yourself, you need to figure out why that is and work on that. Where, hiking the Camino, there were times where you would get to be by yourself and walk by
Hmm.
yourself, but there was also but not for very long. You would always
Right.
run people and talk to people, and that's what made that journey so worthwhile, is the friends that you meet, and the conversations that you had when you were walking.
I'm excited to announce the release of my new book, Live Out Your List: Finding Joy Through a Bucket List Lifestyle. The book covers the 3 stages of the lifestyle, including bucket list mindset, bucket list creation, and bucket list management. It provides tips and strategies to enhance wherever you are in your bucket list journey. To learn more about the book and to receive 10% off when you purchase the ebook, visit crossingitoffpodcast.com/book. Purchase the book today and start to live out your list. Now back to the show.
Just two different experiences, Roger, and both of them were great.
Still takes somebody, it takes a certain type of somebody to do that. Is that something you experienced before, or is it something that you're accustomed to as far as when you travel?
I like traveling by myself. When I wake up in the morning, I like to go when I'm ready to go. And I think walking the Camino, after a while, meeting up with you and the Camigos that we ran into, we gave each other space. As if I wanted to leave at 5 and somebody wanted to go with me at 5 in the morning to go see the Milky Way in the middle of the night when it was still dark, that worked. And if not, and then I'd go by myself. So walking the Camino was a great experience in that way as well, because people were open to do whatever they wanted to do, and there was no set expectations. When I rode my bicycle down the Baja, I ran into Tom and Kim, who were also riding their bicycles. So every once in a while, I would run into them at a campground. We had different speeds. So, I would get there and Tom would already be there, or if I decided to wait a day and visit the town, and then I'd run into Kim, she'd come in the next day. And, we kind of just jumped around and saw each other quite a bit during the trip and became friends. But at the end of the day, we would say, hey, I'm leaving tomorrow, and there was no waiting for somebody. So I like traveling by myself because of that, the freedom that it gives you. And if you decide that you want to stay a day or two in a certain location, or if you want to get on the road early in the morning to beat the heat because there's a hill just out of town that you got to go tackle before it gets to be 100 degrees, you do that.
What is something that if someone came to you and like you had that conversation with your friend about doing this and they said, yeah, I'm really thinking about doing this, was something that, and it doesn't have to be strategic, or it doesn't, or it doesn't have to be a place. It could be any of those things. What's one thing that you would say, hey, if you're going to bike the Baja, you need to do blank? What's the answer to that question?
I would say get a bicycle and show up and start pedaling. It's as simple as that, Roger. I think a lot of people spend too much time over planning, overthinking, over reading. There's a ton of material on the internet. If you want to bike the Baja, you could get inundated just reading all the different articles about it, or YouTubing the videos and all of that. I have a boss back in my prior life, and she said, Keith, the best thing you could do is stop planning and just jump in with both feet and figure it out on the way. And I've always taken that with my endeavors that I do. Is I'm really poor at planning, really piss poor at planning. So I'll, as you were the one on the Camino figuring out where we're going to stay that night. And I would say, hey, text me when you figure it out, and we'll go from there. Some of the things in the Camino will provide, and the Baja will provide. And I never, until knock on wood, has never failed me.
Yeah. What's something that you learned about yourself, right? And talking about Keith, what's something that you learned about yourself through this experience?
I think there's when I was running the Caballo Blanco, which is an ultra marathon down in the Copper Canyon, there's a word that I learned when I was doing that, and it's called animo, which means having the toughness and the mental and physical, having the mental and physical toughness to do what is hard. And the things that are on my bucket list are things that bring that to fruition, or I continue to, it challenge me both physically and mentally. And I find that when I do that, that's when I'm the most proud of myself and feel proud of the accomplishment that I'm able to do, that I was able to do. So I think I'm not sure if it's what I learned, but it's what's reinforced, that if you set your mind to something, and if you're willing to get out of your comfort zone, you can do pretty amazing things. And that's what I need in my life, is to do those things, to reiterate. It's like, yeah, this is what I enjoy doing. And the things when you're doing that, for me, is really rewarding. It's cool, the things that you get to see, do, experience, and the people that you meet.
On that note, I have to ask, what's the next thing on your bucket list?
So I bought a ticket September 29th. I'm going to go hike the Sultan Trail, which is a 1,500 mile walk. It starts in Vienna, Austria. You walk through 9 different countries. It's 1,500 miles, and you end up in Istanbul, Turkey.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, so I bought the ticket. There's not a thank goodness I don't like to plan much because there's not a whole lot of information about it on the internet. But it sounds like an amazing trip, and some of those countries are in the EU, some of them
Mhm.
aren't, which is a good thing because some of it being in the EU, you can only be there for 90 days.
Right.
So
In
being
180.
1,500 miles, and I'm going to be pushing that to get through that by. So I'm going to leave September 29th, October, November, December, probably be done maybe by the end of January.
Wow. Wow. Where did you learn about that?
Just when I was walking the Camino, and a friend of mine that I met that on the Camino, she lives in Germany, and she's doing it, and she was going to do it. I'm not sure she's doing it now. She got to Austria and really likes Austria.
Mm-hmm.
So she's kind of stalled in Austria and spending some time there. But she mentioned it in a group text that we were doing, and I started doing some research about it. And I go, wow, that sounds amazing. Just the countries that you get to go through, and I'm sure the people you're going to meet.
Oh, yeah.
It's a Camino times 4, so it'll be fun.
Wow. That's did you learn anything from your Camino to prepare you for the Sultan Trail? I mean, is there something you're like, oh yeah, okay, now I know you packed pretty light, much lighter than I did. But is there anything you learned from the Camino that you'll use for that trip?
Well, the interesting thing about this trip is probably from what I've been able to read, there's going to be some wild camping on it. So you're going to be out in the middle of nowhere, like in Bulgaria, where you're going to need to bring a tent, a sleeping bag. If it, there's not going to be albergues or hostels for you to stay
Right.
in. I'm going to have to pack a little bit heavier than normal. But I think the one thing that I learned on the Camino that I will take forward on the Sultan's Trail is whatever happens, the Sultan Trail will provide, just like the Camino provides.
Right.
I go back to thinking, and I can't remember her name, but Annie's friend, that when we stopped at the albergue and they said the place is completely full and there's no place to stay. And I think it was the first night that I met you.
Yes.
And, she shows up and she had been hiking all day and her backpack was like 5 times bigger than she was. And she, they said, I'm sorry, but there's no other place. There's no room in this place. And she goes, you got to be kidding me. And so they go, no. And so they go, well, you got to, there's a place 5 or 6 miles down the road that you can stay at. And she goes, yeah, that's not an option. I'm not going to be able to do that. I think she just kind of hung out. And then after everybody kind of went to bed, she snuck in and found a corner where she slept. And the Camino provides, and you have to figure things out a little bit. But and then she became a great friend of ours going down the trail. And I think she hiked for maybe a couple of weeks.
No matter what it is, whether it's learning how to play the ukulele, like I'm attempting to do right now, or doing a hiking, you just have to kind of go with it and keep on pushing and figuring out as you go. It's nothing worth doing is ever easy, is what they say. So.
And I think also too, it's just not having set expectations on exactly how things are gonna work out or happen. Is just go with an open mind and figure it out. If things get too bad, you can always buy a rain jacket, or I remember there again that day where we left and it started raining, and I didn't bring a rain jacket or anything. I found like a poncho for €3, and it rained that one day, and then it never rained the rest of the whole trip. But or at least it didn't rain on me when I was walking. But it was you just figure things out, and if you need something, you can either buy it, or if it really doesn't work out, you can hop on a flight and go back home and lick your wounds for a little bit and try something different. But at least don't be afraid to try it.
Keith, thanks you so much for being here today. How can people follow you and your adventures? I know you're a great photographer. I love following you on Instagram. I think your travel photos are awesome. How can people follow you, especially with this major Sultan Trail coming up?
Sure. I really don't have anything other than Facebook, and it's Keith Weatherman on Facebook. And I think it's Keith Weatherman on Instagram too. So I think when I post on Facebook, it shows up on Instagram. Well, but and another thing on my bucket list is to write a book. And everybody says, "Oh, Keith, you need to write a book and put some pictures in there of your travels and all of that." So that's on my bucket list, and I'm jumping in and completing that as well, working on it.
Good. I can't wait to see that because I really do enjoy your images that you take. You have a good eye while you're traveling. So, Keith, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to be with us. Good journeys ahead for you, especially on the Sultan Trail. And I know I'll be watching. So thank you for being here today and sharing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Roger.
As a reminder to our listeners, in this episode's show notes, you will find links to learn more about this week's guest and information on how you can cross this item off of your list. You can follow my adventures of crossing items off my bucket list on Instagram and Facebook, and as always, new episodes of this podcast are available to stream every Friday morning. We will meet you here next week, and until then, keep living out your list.